I slapped my mother because she called me a whore for joining the porn industry. Hey, Reddit! My name's Lora, and this is probably one of the hardest stories I've ever had to tell. It all started a couple of years ago when I found myself at a crossroads. I was 25, working a soul-crushing job as an administrative assistant, barely making ends meet, and honestly, feeling pretty damn lost. One night, after a particularly shitty day at work, I met up with some friends for drinks. We were talking about life, our shitty jobs, and dreams that seemed out of reach. That's when the topic of the adult industry came up. One of my friends mentioned she had a friend who started doing OnlyFans and was making serious bank. My ears perked up. I had always been open-minded about sex and my own sexuality, but the idea of doing something like that had never crossed my mind seriously until that night. I went home, slightly tipsy, and couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of making good money, being my own boss, and taking control of my life was tempting as hell. I did some research, watched a bunch of YouTube videos from people who were in the industry, and read countless Reddit threads. The more I learned, the more I felt like this could be a real opportunity for me. I talked to my boyfriend Dan about it. I expected him to freak out, but to my surprise, he was super supportive. He told me that as long as I was safe and happy, he would support whatever decision I made. That was the push I needed. So, I did it. I started small, just creating some content for OnlyFans, keeping my identity hidden at first. And guess what? It took off. I was making more money in a month than I did in 6 months at my old job. I couldn't believe it. I finally felt like I was in control of my life, and it was empowering as hell. But of course, not everyone was as supportive as Dan. My parents, especially my mother, Lorena, had no idea what I was doing. I knew they wouldn't understand, so I kept it a secret. I wasn't ashamed of my choice, but I also wasn't ready for the shitstorm that would come with telling them. Things were going well for a while. I was raking in the cash, saving up, and even started to feel a sense of pride in what I was doing. But secrets have a way of coming out, and mine was no different. It all came crashing down one Sunday afternoon. My parents had come over for a family dinner. We were having a good time talking about random things when my mother, Lorena, started pestering me about my new car. It was a sleek, brand new model that I definitely couldn't have afforded on my old salary. She kept asking how I managed to buy it, and I was running out of vague answers. Finally, she cornered me in the kitchen while Dan and my dad, Dan Sr., were outside grilling. She looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "Lora, how the hell did you afford that car? Are you in some kind of trouble?" I don't know what came over me, but I decided it was time to come clean. I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I started working in the adult industry. I'm doing OnlyFans." The look on her face was a mix of shock, disappointment, and disgust. She didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. Then she exploded. She called me every name in the book, but the one that stung the most was whore. She spat it out like it was the most vile word she could think of. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me. I tried to stay calm, but she just kept going, tearing me down, calling me a disgrace to the family. I snapped. I slapped her across the face, and the room went dead silent. My dad and Dan rushed in, asking what the hell was going on. My mother was holding her cheek, looking at me like I was a monster. I told them everything. I was done hiding. The weeks that followed were pure hell. My parents were furious and heartbroken. My mother refused to speak to me, and my dad was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace but clearly struggling with his own feelings about it. Dan was my rock through all of this. He kept reminding me that I made a choice for myself, and that I shouldn't let anyone make me feel ashamed of it. But it was hard. My family's rejection cut deep, and I started to second-guess everything. The news spread through our small town like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone knew about my new career, and the whispers and judgmental stares followed me everywhere. Old friends distanced themselves, and I felt more isolated than ever. Despite all this, I kept working. I wasn't going to let their opinions control my life. I built a following, connected with other people in the industry, and even started mentoring new creators. It gave me a sense of purpose and community that I desperately needed. But every family gathering was a nightmare. My mother made it her mission to make me feel like shit. She'd drop snide comments and give me those judgmental looks that could kill. My dad was quieter about it, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. One night after a particularly brutal family dinner, Dan and I sat in our car outside my parents' house. I was crying, feeling like I couldn't take it anymore. Dan held my hand and said, "Lora, we need to set boundaries. This isn't healthy for you." He was right. I knew he was. So we decided to have one last talk with my parents to lay everything out and set some ground rules. I was terrified, but I knew it had to be done. We invited my parents over to our place. I could tell they were on edge, probably expecting another fight. We sat down in the living room and I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I started. "I know you don't approve of my career choice, but it's my life. I'm happy, I'm safe, and I'm doing well for myself. I need you to respect that." My mother scoffed. "Respect? You want respect for being a whore?" Dan cut in, his voice calm but firm. "Lorena, enough with the name-calling. This isn't productive. We're here to find a way to move forward as a family." My dad nodded, looking tired. "Lora, we just worry about you. This industry, it's not safe. It's not what we wanted for you." I understood their concerns, but I was done being treated like a child. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm an adult. I've done my research, I'm taking all the necessary precautions, and I'm making more money than I ever did at my old job. This is my decision, and I need you to accept that." There was a long silence. My mother looked like she was about to explode, but my dad put a hand on her arm, calming her. He turned to me, his eyes softer. "We just want you to be safe and happy. If this is really what you want, we'll try to understand, but please be careful." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. My mother was still furious, but she seemed to realize that she couldn't change my mind. We agreed to avoid the topic during family gatherings and focus on rebuilding our relationship. Things didn't magically get better overnight, but there was a noticeable change. My parents tried, in their own awkward way, to show support. My mother still had her moments, but my dad and I started to rebuild our relationship. I continued to thrive in the industry. I expanded my content, collaborated with other creators, and even started investing some of my earnings. Dan and I moved into a bigger place, and I felt a sense of stability and happiness that I hadn't felt in years. One day, out of the blue, my mother called me. I was hesitant to answer, but I did. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lora, I'm sorry. I may never fully understand your choices, but I don't want to lose you. Can we try to move past this?" I was stunned. It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was a step. We started talking more, slowly rebuilding our relationship. It was a rocky road, but we were making progress. Looking back, I don't regret my decision. Joining the adult industry gave me the financial freedom and confidence I needed. It taught me to stand up for myself and not let others dictate my worth. So, that's my story, Reddit. It's been a hell of a journey, but I'm stronger for it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you have to live your life for yourself, not for others. And sometimes you have to fight like hell to make them see that. Her face immediately changed. concern and confusion mixing in her eyes. "What about Bran?" she asked, clearly worried. I took a deep breath and told her everything, every disgusting detail. Her face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger. But when I finished,